So this is the only slide that will be there, right? We're not going to have any other slide. So we are not audible, right, Nirja, to others?
Yeah.
So Bhaskar, my whole association with HiSEA also started with GA only. So
yeah, that's what I heard about it too. Yeah.
When Nari became the president, Nari used to head Infosys at the time, 2008. So he wanted Jay to be on the managing committee, and Jay said, no, like I don't want to be. You take Ramesh. So till then I was not. I used to be on HiSEA product jury for 2 years. I was little involved. I had spoken at few since 2003-4, spoken at few HiSEA events and was on product jury, but otherwise not actively involved with HiSEA. So Jay referred, and then Nari reached out, and that's how I joined. 2008 is when I started.
You started in that, yeah. Well, when was HiSEA founded?
So Jay only got me in.
Yeah.
28 years ago. It's 1991.
1991. Okay.
So we had the Silver Jubilee 3 years back, 4 years back.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's in fact like HiSEA was founded just little less than a year after NASSCOM was founded. So when NASSCOM, which is the National Software Association, because NASSCOM is like much bigger with national mandate.
Much bigger.
But HiSEA, in this city, probably one of the few cities where HiSEA, a local association, is present to begin with and also more active.
Yeah, it's pretty active.
HiSEA is quite active in Hyderabad, yeah.
So we'll give it another 1-2 minutes, Nirja. It's 9.
Airtel is saying 8:59.
Barney, we can start.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Barney Kumar Arol, President of HiSEA and CEO of InfoPeers. And it's a great pleasure to invite you all to the latest and last edition of series of events planned as a part of our Innovation Month. scheduled in August. We had 3 great sessions with very accomplished leaders and innovators the last 3 weeks and witnessed incredible response. Thanks to all of you. As you may be aware that HiSEA is a 28-year-old organization with more than 300 member companies covering 90% of the IT industry in Hyderabad. We've been working on several initiatives in the areas of innovation, infrastructure, development, SME support and promotion, CSR and Academia Connect, engaging all the stakeholders such as the industry, government, academia, IT employees, volunteers, NGOs, technology partners, research institutions, etc. That would benefit and potentially impact the IT industry in every manner. Innovation is one of the key focus areas of HiSEA, and we intend to improve and strengthen the innovation ecosystem in all possible ways, leveraging the collective knowledge, wisdom, expertise of the industry. As a part of this mission, we have embarked on knowledge dissemination processes, such as hosting webinars, e-tech series through weekly TV programs on the latest digital technologies, mentoring programs for the startups, and running up to the annual Innovation Summit. Today's session is another effort in that direction. My good friend and our past president, Ramesh Loknath, will be moderating this session today. It is a great pleasure to welcome Mr. Bhaskar Sunkara, co-founder and CTO, AppDynamics, for the session today. Before I hand over to Ramesh, please be informed that we have the annual Innovation Summit and Awards 2020, the flagship event of HiSEA, coming up in the first week of November. Stay connected and participate in the event without fail. Further, I would request all of you to visit our website, www.hisea.in, and our Twitter and FB handles, HiSEA1991, and follow them to get frequent updates on our activities. Enjoy the session today. On behalf of the HiSEA Executive and Management Committee members, I thank you for all the support to HiSEA. Many thanks, and over to Ramesh. Ramesh, you're on mute. Ramesh, you're on mute, please.
Yeah, sorry. So good morning, and thank you, Barney. It's a pleasure. I've been doing this for years, but I think today's is definitely very, very special. Somebody I've known just fresh out of college, less than 20 years back, or just about a little less than 20 years back. And what a phenomenal journey it's been. So very, very happy to be anchoring this conversation with Bhaskar. So Bhaskar, welcome to the session, and thank you for joining us today. So we're going to be discussing your journey today, right, Bhaskar?
Yeah.
And it's been an amazing journey. I think we hope that journey itself is an inspiration to others to embark on the whole innovation path. So let's start from the start, at least the professional start. So where did it all start? I know it started in Hyderabad, and it's Pramati, that's where we met. And but I just want to hear it from you. So where did it all start? How did Pramati happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll cover a couple points that were relevant from the past. My link back to just my interest in programming started when I was 7 or 8, when I started learning basic programming. So that's when my interest in computer science and programming and all of that started. And then when I went to college, in the last year, I actually picked up, I really picked up middleware. You know, I started getting super interested in middleware, and that started becoming a passion of mine in terms of how you can have object-oriented programming on the internet, and you could invoke objects, across different streams. And then I actually started out my career in Delhi. I was in a startup, which was a B2B company. But I always knew that I wanted to work, for a product company. But obviously at that time, I didn't know Pramati, because again, Pramati was in Hyderabad, I was in Delhi, and then Pramati used to hire only by references. So I wasn't even aware of it. The way I got into Pramati was a super interesting story. I had a colleague of mine, who used to live in Gurgaon, and somebody from Pramati, and I think you know Ashish, obviously, he was traveling to Delhi to meet a customer, and as he did the customer trip, he and a friend of mine, my colleague, they were traveling in the same bus, and they just happened to hit it off, and they exchanged some notes. And my colleague came back to me and he said, "Hey, I heard about this company. They're building a product. They're out of India." And I said, you must be kidding me, because nobody builds a product in India. You know, it was just unheard of back in those days. But when I looked up, I went to the website. I was like, this is where I want to go. Like, I want this job so badly. And then I said, hey, can you put in a good word for me? Ask him to sort of maybe refer me, you know, get us in and all of that stuff. So that's a long period where we really hounded Ashish. And then when he went back, you know, he did talk to HR, and it was like an excruciating wait of 2 or 3 weeks. But eventually the interview call came in, and I took 2+ weeks to prep for it, because I knew I couldn't blow this opportunity, because I was interested in middleware. So product company out of India, it was kind of like a, you know, dream for me. So I got in, but I obviously didn't know much, because I was straight out of college, and Pramati was such accomplished people. When I walked in, you know, just the team was so accomplished and so amazing. It's so inspiring. And but yeah, I eventually made it through the interview, and that's where the journey started.
You know, it's I mean, my exposure to Pramati was not much different either. Just a year earlier, I was in the Bay Area at that time. And so my boss one day called and said, like, look, there's a company from India that's presenting their product. We're looking at OEMing their product. The CTO is here. Do you want to go? You might like it. I said, wow. I mean, a company from India, that too from Hyderabad. I mean, I was not connected to Hyderabad at that time. And that's when I first time heard about Pramati from Vijay. And I was so impressed. And that even Informix was trying to license. And then the connection continued. And then when finally Informix didn't happen, that's when I reached out to Vijay, and then I moved a year later. But you're right. I mean, it was very impressive. Even today, I don't think such companies happen in India much. Hardcore infrastructure product companies don't happen as often even now. And those days, you're right. Almost it was unheard of. So, and then like you started Pramati, like I know you did a few different things before settling into one of the product teams after a short while. And what was that? I mean, Pramati was an amazing company, right? I mean, very gutsy to build a Java app server when Java, server-side Java itself was only a year old world over standards. Absolutely. And then like, it was very gutsy to even be attempting what it did. But unfortunately, 9/11 and all that hit. And so Pramati hit a very, very lean patch. So how was it those days? I mean, when that lean patch started, kind of, how was it like? I mean, looking at it from your viewpoint, I know you're very young. These are not very high on anybody's mind at that age.
Absolutely,
but there's so much of it around, so you can't ignore it. I mean, it just hits you. So how was it?
Those absolutely.
2003 to 5
period. I think your point's very right. I was super focused on learning. I was super focused on just churning out code and learning how to build stuff. So that way, I wasn't very focused on what else was going on. But my first exposure to what happened post 9/11 and everything else was when I actually made my first trip to the Bay Area from Pramati, which was more of a sales trip, you know, pre-sales, talking to customers, you know, making things work in their environments. And I already knew, I already started seeing some of that impact of how, you know, whether it's the economy, whether it's, you know, all of the other things. And I also realized how hard it was for startups in India to build products primarily for the US market. You know, because the feedback and everything else is coming from customers who are regularly using it there. And from that to come over here and really inject that into engineering was such a tough process. Like the infrastructure is so much better now for that. But that's kind of what I really saw on how tough it was to transfer the information, because that was my first learning on the field. Because I actually started, it's one thing to code, sit and code by your desk and, you know, churning out amazing pieces of software. But then you're like, what does the market want? What do, you know, people really think about in terms of a product? And how do you bridge that gap? And how do you make the product market fit, in a sense, happen? So I started seeing that. But again, it was like a very tough going because of multiple factors. And I think that's when we started figuring out like what to do next. Do we supplement it by working with some other companies and like giving them some services and helping them with their architectures and things like that? So we started doing, you know, a little bit of that. So my total time spent in Pramati was the first 5 years. I joined in 2000 and then I eventually left in 05. So 03, 05, so Jay and Vijay actually moved me to the Bay Area. And I was working out of there, more on the field, doing more pre-sales, doing more post-sales, making stuff happen. But again, it was a very tough time with, because of the factors I mentioned. And eventually in 05, I was like, I want to get started on my journey to sort of build more products and get wider exposure. So that's when I decided to make a change. But those 2 years were pretty tough.
I know. I mean, it was, and we did one. Me and Chandru put this together. I think end of 2004. So I mean, you remember we had like in 2003 we were running 40 to 50% attrition rate, which was unheard of in India those days. I mean, even the companies where people did 20% itself was considered very high, and we were running 40%, which means like 4 out of 10 people left in that year. And then but still there were people that stayed. You stayed. Many of us that stayed through the worst period. End of 2004 was the worst, when it almost looked like company was shutting down. And and still at that time there were still 40 people that were still in the company, and most of whom have been there for like more than 4 or 5 years. Almost all of them. Few had joined just recently, but many of them. So we did a study saying like, why did those that leave, and why did those that stay? And it was an interesting paper. I mean, I don't know if you read that. We put a short analysis together.
I haven't actually. I'd love to read it.
It was. I will. I still should be having it somewhere. And for me, it was like, of course, I was not fresh out of college. So I was looking at things, and then I was very, very aware from 2001 itself, after the 9/11 induced recession started. And things are not great. And but it was amazing to observe how, and of course, all through Jay and Vijay have been like rock solid, right? I mean, it was inspiration to have them around. So I'm sure we'll come back to that a little bit later. I'm sure they were inspiration at some form
in
your journey as well as an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
Later, we'll come to that when we get to. So then, how did Wiley happen? Because that was an interesting company also. Of course, you joined much later in the journey, but how did it happen? Why Wiley?
Yeah, absolutely. And one quick line about like why I stayed was just because I was fresh out of college and I was learning so much. So I wanted to just stick to it and keep learning. And then especially the combo of being on the field, coming back into engineering, and how you combine those things together, I feel that was the most significant part of my career. So
it's a very unusual experience. Even today, most people don't get it. I mean, a reality check.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's one thing to build products. Be in the at the intersection, rubber meeting the road. I mean, like product meeting the from an engineering viewpoint, meeting customers. It's a very, very not a common experience.
Yeah, I spent 6 months in 2001 on the field, right? 5 to 6 months. And then I came back, and then I was back into code engineering, and I was doing code, and I was applying all the lessons I learned. So I feel like that was the most significant part of my career, because I started looking at both aspects together. So that was that part. And then I think being at Pramati, I feel like just with the people and kind of what we set out to do, it was literally like systems programming in Java, right? So you would understand so much about middleware, plumbing, app servers, and everything else, that you're out in the market and you just know so much more than the average software engineer, right? So I was pretty empowered at the end of 05, at the middle of 05, when I left and I was looking for a job. And I interviewed in a few companies, and one of the first ones, or the second one I interviewed, was Wiley. And it was very interesting to me because they were monitoring what Pramati was building, right? They were really monitoring app servers. They were really monitoring middleware. And I was like, this is the perfect job for me, because I can use all my leverage here, and then I get to Wiley, and I can use my leverage in really understanding and monitoring middleware. So that's why it was a perfect job for me. And I obviously liked the culture, liked the people. And at that point, there was no hint of it being acquired or anything like that. So it was the perfect size, and I got in there. It was my first exposure to like a regular Bay Area company versus like the culture in India and the product culture in India and everything else, which was so rare and which was so unique to Pramati.
So again, I mean, Wiley was one company we used to watch. And then there was a Chennai company. It was, at that time it was called AdventNet, which became Zoho. I mean, now legendary Zoho.
Yeah, sure.
But at that time they were AdventNet. They were doing also app server monitoring using the Java standards, JMX standards. And I remember we were tracking both these companies at that time, 2003, 4
Sure.
time because they were interesting complementing companies. We were looking at getting into that space ourselves because we had a full JMX implementation for managing these app servers. And those were very interesting. Interesting times tracking all these companies. Many of them global players already. Even Zoho, AdventNet was fairly well known in those days. And then of course, the rest of them were US-based companies anyway. So it was very nice. So then the CA acquisition happened. So how was it? I mean, that's a shift, right? A small startup in Delhi coming to Pramati and then exploring the intersection of product and field in Pramati. And then Wiley is another relatively, I mean, not a large company, but not a very young startup. It's still a startup. That's it's not a large company. And CA, so how was it? Must have been a culture shock.
Yeah, it was a culture shock in some ways. I think I spent about 3 years in total at CA. Like I joined, mid 2005. And then I eventually left CA when we started AppDynamics in 2008, right? So it was about a 3-year journey, out of which half of it was the non-acquired part, and like about 1 year or so was the acquired part. I mean, obviously, when it was announced that we were acquired by CA, it wasn't like something super happy that we were pumped about, because I mean, they used to say back in those days about CA is that's where software goes to die, because they just like milk the company, and then no one really thought much of the culture, because especially if you're in the Valley, and granted I was new to the Valley, but you just take to the Valley culture so easily because it's just fast moving, and you just really love how people want to take risks and how fast everybody moves. And so this was a company based out of New York and not really steeped in like core innovation, and like the only innovation they used to do was just buying companies. So I honestly, as soon as that happened, I couldn't wait to get out of there. But as part of what they say in your career in the US, you're always somewhat sort of hampered by immigration. And I was sort of in the stage of waiting for my next stage for my green card process, which then sets me up for sort of like a longer stint in my career. And I couldn't really leave for about a year or so. In culture shock ways, it wasn't as extreme because we still stayed in our own office.
As an independent group still.
As an independent group,
helped,
that helped a lot. And it sort of, started they started making very small changes, but overall it was all solid, because we didn't actually see all the changes that they were doing. They just started moving us to a new facility, which was another company, and one of the floors was CA. It was very close to the office we had, and I actually happened to go up to that floor, and that was like the culture and everything else was like as you said, was a culture shock. But we never really interacted well with
I think
them.
you got really lucky. I mean, that you were not in New York. I mean, if not, they would have integrated into the and killed the culture in few months.
Yeah, absolutely. I just saw somebody remark that the audio is off, so just making sure that
Nirja will take care of it. I mean, she's trying.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So yeah, I think so. But again, like I had to wait a little bit just because of the immigration thing. So the significant part about the Wiley story was Wiley was where I met Jyoti, who was basically the CEO who founded AppDynamics, and me and him I think joined a couple of weeks apart, and we became really good friends. What was rare about Wiley was that there were not a lot of, usually, software companies have a lot of Indian folks, and we're not a lot at Wiley. So I think I started spending a lot of time with Jyoti, and one of the things we started doing was started to talk about the space, working through with some of the ideas on how the next generation of, performance monitoring needs to be and things like that. And so because of the immigration thing though, like whatever we were thinking about and what I wanted to do in terms of, hey, I want to just go to a startup or join something super early, I couldn't. And we started brainstorming, and we started sort of working through some of our ideas and thinking about stuff. But I didn't make the move for a little bit, but eventually I didn't I officially I didn't get to the next stage, but I eventually quit. But overall, things worked out on the green card stage. But that's one of the things that hindered my sort of journey at that point.
It's all for the good. I'm sure it all
It's
worked
all
out
for
well.
good, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so, so when you quit, I mean, like, so how did the whole idea of AppDynamics come about? I mean, you and Jyoti,
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
decided, I know it's still related to middleware space, monitoring of distributed platforms and such, and yet different from Wiley in the sense of what it was trying to do. So how did the whole idea of AppDynamics come, and how did you pick that niche? Because that's the biggest challenge, right? How do you pick a niche where
Absolutely.
there is an opportunity? So how do you pick that particular niche that AppDynamics was in?
So when we were at Wiley, we used to talk about how we wanted to approach performance monitoring. And we had a lot of thoughts about how it needs to be very different in a very distributed world, right? Because, when you think about, 05, 06, the cluster of app servers that would serve out the application was still small. It wasn't sort of massively service oriented and distributed, right? So the Wiley technique was still pretty much connecting to a JVM and, using bytecode instrumentation and getting out of those metrics and then using those in dashboards. But everything was getting message oriented. Things like JMS were taking off, and it was getting way more distributed. So we had a lot of thinking on how to do next generation APM. But the other thought we had was, if we go into the market and think about funding for APM, then it would be very hard because we're coming from a competitor. So Jyoti had some really solid ideas about next generation capacity management on the cloud. And that's initially what he basically raised money for. And that's when I kind of joined him. But as we started talking to customers, we saw that that idea was too ahead of its time, because customers weren't yet ready to run production workloads on the cloud. This was in 08, right? Everybody had a cloud initiative, but they weren't yet ready to put it in prime time, and things like that. So that's when we pivoted, in October of 08 and said, look, I think the market still has a lot of appetite for APM. And thankfully, because of a lot of our thinking, we had some plans in our back pocket, which were, how do you redefine, performance monitoring? And just to give you like a quick 1 minute of what our thinking uniquely was different was, people still did performance monitoring by looking at CPU, looking at, things like garbage collection, looking at things like memory, and then started measuring code. They're like, what are my key methods? Tell me what are my key methods and how they're performing and, what their response time is. And then we said, look, everything is changing. You can't measure methods because you end up changing code and you do something else. And what are you going to do with those metrics? So measure something that matters to the user. And we came up with this concept of business transaction, which is, if you're a travel company, you measure the performance of searching for a flight. If you're a banking company, you measure the performance of checking for your account balance, right? And now it's super common. This is the way performance monitoring really works now. But we were the ones who really redefined it by just taking the risk of this is something that's constant. And then we also figured out how to apply it to distributed systems. So for example, I started out really working on the agent, which is collecting the data from app servers. And I think my knowledge of app servers and plumbing helped a lot because I could really figure out how to pass context on across JVMs, across messages, and then construct the whole sort of. So that came in really, really handy at that time. So my experience at Wiley and my experience at Promethi was a great, was of great help when we did AppD, especially the instrumentation part.
So those days, early days, I'm sure the first year or two must have been a struggle as you're just building, getting established and such. How did that stage compare with, I know you were, like you said already, more focused on learning, being just young and during Promethi days, but then you can't, it cannot escape you, right? Things happening around eventually rub off, and that too, you spent extended periods just holed up with Vijay in the US. So casual conversations also, you'll get insights even if you didn't ask for it into what's happening in small struggles. So how did these struggles, of Promethi compare with your first 1 or 2 years at AppDynamics before things started getting into the groove in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big difference was that at App Dynamics, we had still had a lot of access to customers even in the early going. Because Jyoti was really great at fundraising. So, he got Lightspeed and Greylock, two of the top firms in the Valley, to, do our Series A when it was just the two of us, right? One, because of that type of exposure, and then obviously we hired the right sort of business lead generation type of folks who gave us access to a lot of customers, and we kept having conversations, and we were listening all the time, and we weren't sort of like really just married to one idea by which we kind of raised funds, and we were open to what the customer wanted. And to our surprise, we found that the performance monitoring market, the APM market, wasn't really mature at all, and it had a lot of gaps. That's when we started attacking it, because we spent 3 years at a company which did it, and we picked up the craft from there. So that's really kind of what the thing was. But I think the first year or 2 years is very interesting, right? Because you think about multiple type of use cases, and you want to do everything. You want to build a product that basically is like the silver bullet, which solves like everything, and then only like 2 or 3 months in, or a little bit later, you start realizing that you can only build so much, you can only release so much. You can't sort of because as an engineer, you dream, and you're like, we can build anything we want, and it's just code. But I think reality kicks in when you start talking, and you understand how the journey from zero to actually shipping a product that people want to buy, and buy at scale, basically happens. So yeah, I mean, the first 2 years were very interesting, but access to customers, I think, was the big difference.
I think that's the challenge, right? I mean, you're right. I mean, engineers dream up. I mean, engineers want to build. I mean, and the product managers want to sell. So, and as a founder, you have to balance. I mean, like as an engineering group, it's easy for us to get carried away. But as a founder, that's where both converge. I mean, you have to balance the dream with the reality. And
absolutely.
That's always a challenge, but you're right. I think the early access to customers, make sure you're building something that matters to the market. And that discovery is the most critical in any startup journey.
Absolutely.
The sooner you discover that sweet spot, I mean, the faster is going to be the journey, I mean, the growth. So how, I mean, the early, that was a time when the whole service-oriented architecture was kind of getting widely adopted in enterprises, and like they were getting into the business layer, right, so to speak. So the services layer was essentially the integration layer across different systems, and like and Rich Web was coming up, and those were the layers where essentially the business layer, like you said. Who were some of the large names that you started working with early on? I mean, like, because it is in Pramati, while we did talk to, there's some Morgan Stanley and few other large names, but there's not too many large names in Pramati. Wiley, you're probably in engineering, so I'm not sure how much in touch you were with the markets in Wiley. So most likely, App Dynamics experience might have been the first one when you started talking to some of the larger players. How was that initial brush with those large players? I mean,
No, I think the one thing I would probably want to call out is performance monitoring was a very heavy duty, high friction kind of a story, because you would have somebody come in and install it for your app and customize it and create custom configurations. But our first customer happened to be someone where we didn't even go on site. So we asked them to download our product, and they started using it, and we're like, hey, I think we should just call them to see how they're doing with the product. And then we call them maybe like 4 or 5 weeks in after they downloaded, and they said, hey, we want to buy it. How do we basically raise a purchase order? And it just blew our mind. And it was a very small deal. It was like a $2,500 deal. But the fact that that came in with them trying it out with the very minimal documentation that I wrote, it was astonishing. But that actually gave us a way of thinking that, look, this thing's going to be great, because it is intuitive. And we don't have to sit and explain how to learn this, and it works. It automatically kind of works. So that's kind of step number one. But in terms of big names, we were very, very lucky to work with some of the big names in the beginning. So the biggest one, of course, was Netflix, right? Netflix was our customer number 3, I think. Even the second customer was really awesome. It was Electronic Arts. right? But a division of it, and we worked with them. But the real big experience was, I think in the beginning, there were probably three big names. Netflix, who everybody knows, but back at that time, it wasn't yet, the big behemoth that, it is right now. I mean, now Netflix runs about hundreds and thousands of servers, in Europe, Asia, everywhere. When we started working with Netflix, it had about 100 servers running in a physical data center. It hadn't even moved to AWS, right? So Netflix was one of the first ones. Then Williams Sonoma, which is like a really big retail shop in the US, that was the other one. And then I don't know if you remember Priceline, which was like a huge travel, company back then on the East Coast. Those were the three big names that we worked with in the first in the first 10 customers scenario. And yeah, I think because of those names, we were hugely, it was hugely helpful in getting us the traction, because when people were like, if those guys use it and at that scale, then you guys must be good. Yeah.
So that helps. I think Netflix coming on early,
Absolutely.
and I think their growth also helped, because they had a meteoric growth. So I think them coming on early is also good. So, so was there any inflection point? I mean, they always say startups in the journey, there's an inflection point where you hit the knee and then kind of take off. What was that inflection point where things kind of just you hit that, understood that sweet spot, the right sweet spot, got validated, and like you just kind of got the wind in the sail picked up? What was that inflection point?
I think for us, the time when we knew that we were going to make it big was when Netflix basically said, we're going to deploy you guys in all of our servers. Because that's a big deal. Like this is a company going places, and our technology, if you think about it, it is kind of a little bit of a risk to the customer, right? Because what you're doing is you're installing our software in your application, and it can crash you. It can get you, it can do the exact opposite of what it's supposed to do. And they were enough like unstable performance monitoring technologies which crashed servers and people got burnt. Netflix actually had got burnt by using some previous performance monitoring technologies, which either slowed them or crashed them. So when Netflix looked at our value and said, I mean, guys, this is great. Like we have 125 servers and would like to just use this on all of our servers. And they put us through the test in terms of, so the biggest thing you need to do apart from functionality is overhead. It's an overhead game, because if you give the customer a lot of functionality, but end up slowing up the app, then what's the point? Like you're using us to speed it up, right? So they put us on one server. They did not put us on one server, and they started comparing the CPU graphs of both of those servers, right? And it was a very dramatic, like 2 or 3 weeks, because when they started it out, we started pegging the CPU at like literally 90%, and the other instance was running at 25%, right? Wow. And so then became like this super torturous journey of like, what is actually happening and how do we bring down the CPU of the instance that we are installed in? And we started taking each part of the functionality out to see, which is like a typical performance exercise on what is causing overhead. So start disabling your functionality. And at some point we took out everything and it was still running at 90%. And it eventually turned out to be a bug in the IBM JVM, which we were just using a flag, and with 0% of our code running, it was still slowing it down, because if you enable that flag in the IBM JVM, it just like slows down things because of some JIT issue in the JVM. So that was very dramatic. And the moment when I realized that's what was happening, and we give them like an agent with that flag disabled, I still remember that moment, because it's such a crucial moment in our lives, because when they took that out without changing any code, at a high level, then they started looking at the CPU numbers, and you couldn't tell which server had AppDynamics on and which server didn't. Which is, fantastic. I think at that time we knew this is the value we're giving, and at this type of load with Netflix in production, we can hum along where people don't even know that they have our software running. I think this is it. Like we're just gonna kill it. And that was a moment which I still remember. And yeah, and I kept the printout of the graphs with me for a very long time. Yeah.
I'm sure it's worth framing and keeping it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
No,
Yeah.
it's amazing. Now, once the growth started, I mean, so I'm
Yeah.
sure once more and more customers start coming in, and like then you'd have scaled up pretty fast in those next couple of years. How did you preserve? See, like again, at that time, there's a kind of almost like a heads down focus on one side, build the product, and the other side sell the product. That's the absolute focus, which is required also in that stage of a startup journey. But how did you kind of preserve the values, the right people coming in? Because I'm sure you and Jyoti had your own style of functioning and things that mattered more to you in teams.
Absolutely. Yeah,
was that a challenge, or did it happen more naturally? I mean, how did you preserve that as you scaled up crazily?
I mean, like we had a very deliberate strategy, which, in hindsight now sounds like, that was such a great plan, etc. Right? But what we were trying to do was to make sure that there was no lack of communication between different teams and divisions, right? So, like for example, so between us, we were looking at obviously not just executing with engineering, but PM used to report to me. So I was like building out the product management organization. So there was no disconnect between product management and engineering. That happens a lot of times because, product management is so focused on the outward requirements and what the customers are saying, and the bridge between them doesn't really form. So because we were so closely knit together, that was not a problem. And then the initial sales engineering team, I built that out. So hiring the initial sales engineers, because that's where the rubber meets the road. You go out on a POC, you install, and that's when a lot of embarrassing things happen in the product. Stuff doesn't work. You run it in your labs and you're like, this is amazing. This is humming. This is sort of generating such interesting data, but you always face new challenges in new environments. And, but I think what you have to do is you have to learn on the field, come back and apply the systemic knowledge that you gained on the field. And because we had those divisions very tightly knit together, I think there was not a lot of lack of communication. So there was constant touch in terms of what's actually happening on the field, because otherwise you're sitting in your own zone building stuff and you don't know what's happening on the field. And then the final frontier was sales. And what Jyoti and I used to do was at that time, our head of sales used to manage a spreadsheet of the 10 to 15 most likely to close deals in the quarter, right? And then we would track those deals to see what stage they were in, right? So if one of those deals will have a support call on something that was not working, then Jyoti would get on the call or I would get on the call, and we'd make sure that that's unblocked, because if the sales leader is saying, hey, this is the biggest chance of my deal to be closing, then we'd rather be on it and help it, right? So we were very focused on, we're not building software for the sake of building software. We want to create a business, and being very attached to sales and sort of, really selling software is what, is going to run this business. So again, I think it's the tight connection between, and we preserved that for a very long time, because up until about 3 years, I still was going to every POC. And to the point where people are like, dude, you should stop coming. This doesn't make any sense. And then I realized that I was in too much with some of the, some of the team. So I started sort of pulling back. So, but we were very closely.
But I think that is,
connected.
Two very, very important points you touched. One is, I think, the very tightly knit connect with the market, right? I mean, you're building a product, and especially in the formative stages, first few years, when you're still figuring out exactly what to build. You have a broad idea, but I think being a very, very tight, close looping with the market is very important, so that you have a solid pulse. You should be able to know to read the pulse and accordingly go kind of build it. And then kind of very, very fast looping. So I think
Yeah, and actually, one of the other examples that'd be super interesting is that, especially with both Jyoti and I building some of the stuff, there was an instance where we were working with Williams-Sonoma, and when we installed and when we were working through stuff, and as you know, performance monitoring is about discovering different stacks. So at that time, we were working with a version of Struts, and we had to figure out how Struts metrics were performing. And the version of struts that we had support for and the version that Williams Sonoma had were different, right? So what happened there was Jyoti engaged the contact at Williams Sonoma, and he was talking to him. And as he was talking to him, I basically built out a patch that added support for the newer version. And by the time his conversation was done, I had a patch ready, and we're like, yeah, put this in, and then it started working, and then that's how you make things happen. You know, that's what startups are about. You got to be hungry enough to say there's no rules, there's no formalities. You just have to make the product work.
Yes.
In any way possible. And we did that so many times. We did that so many times at so many places. We would churn overnight patches. We would make overnight changes. And most of the patches were like adding support and fixing small things in how we discovered things. But that was one of the most fun experiences in translating your software to business, which is amazing.
I think that is true. I mean, that's the most important make or break for any startup. If you have that pulse, you have the ability to read the pulse and react to that pulse. That's, I think, make or break. The other thing, I think, back to the point on values, I think from what you described, subconsciously, just the fact that you and Jyoti were very tightly involved in all the functions and very actively engaged, I think the culture happens naturally, which was the approach even in Pramati, Jay and Vijay had. Not that they ever gave any lectures on what the culture should be. The culture evolved just by virtue of them being involved. You meet them, you see them every day, you talk to them, they talk to you.
Absolutely.
So very subconsciously, the culture sets in. You understand what matters to them. And if you had the right set of people in the early days, they will make sure the same thing happens in their respective organizations later.
It has to trickle down. It's not a document. It's not a deck, right? Like it has to be like you have to walk it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So we should give some time for some questions from the participant. But then I want to touch upon this though. I mean, like the most, at least as a journey, one of the most exciting parts, while the hardest parts are in the early days, but the reward comes later, right? So the acquisition itself, right? I mean, you stayed at it for 8-9 years before finally getting acquired. So it's a long journey for a startup. Not many startups that grow that fast. You sometimes buckle. I mean, you could have got an offer at 200 million, 500 million, 1 billion, but you stayed on because you wanted to build. But so 9 years is a pretty good time for a very fast growing startup. How did that final exit happen? What made it happen? How did it happen? And why did you decide to do it?
Absolutely. So and actually, to your point, all those numbers happened. We had offers for 200, 500, billion. Like so that definitely happened in the background. But
it would be surprising if it did not happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but we were very clear on like we wanted to build something for the long run, and we wanted to sell $1 billion worth of software. So that was our goal. So we kept going. And with our growth, I mean, our growth numbers were like we whatever revenue we did, we tripled it the next year. We kept doubling consistently up until we got to 300 plus, about 400 million, right? And so we kept doubling our rate. So the rate at which we were growing, an IPO was like a foregone conclusion that we needed to just go do an IPO. And we were tweaking some of our business model in the beginning because we started out by selling both perpetual licenses and subscription licenses. So we wanted to clean up all of that. And then we were ready for an IPO, and we started working on the process. Everything was ready for us to go IPO. So incidentally on the 26th of January, so we were super pumped. And the team was also in New York. And we were like, basically people bought suits, and like the whole IPO thing was all set up. And we were initially supposed to float about 2 billion or a little more than that, in terms of the IPO valuation of where we were. But that was the time when the elections had happened in 2016, November, and, Trump had got in. And it was very uncertain because, it's such a big change in the whole government structure and everything else that we were like, it's pretty risky to go into the market right now, and who knows what happens to the market. So during that time, as we were pretty primed to do an IPO, Cisco gave us an offer in some ways that we couldn't refuse because they were offering, we were floating at about 2 billion or so, and they said it's close to 4. Like we got offered 3.7, right? So it was tough to kind of not take that risk and like really look at like the just the wealth creation also amongst the company and like the payoff for all the hard work. So eventually I think it it made sense to us. I mean, hindsight, the market actually took off. So if we had stayed, we'd probably be at a 10 to 15 bill valuation right now. You know, because some of our peers who didn't really have as mature a product as we did, you know, went to those values, you know, at some point. But again, like there's no regrets. But that's how that happened. We were like, some of the team was already in New York. You know, I was also already on the East Coast for the IPO, and it was all last minute. It was very dramatic, and you know, it's a little bittersweet, right? I mean, I think you know you're doing the right thing, but again, like you want to do the IPO thing, and eventually what happened was Cisco got us to go to NASDAQ and ring the bell. So some of us got a chance to actually go ring the bell that opens up the market in NASDAQ, and it was pretty amazing that we were able to do it because we were so close. I think they kind of just gave us that opportunity to do it.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I've been there once also from Progress.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, the whole ritual. It's
good experience.
It's very nice to be there.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, and then what after that? I kind of know. I mean, but what happened after that? Like, I mean, how long did you stay on with Cisco?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, when the acquisition happens, especially for the core team and you know the heads of departments and things like that, you are in a non-compete, so you can't really go out and build something immediately or something like that. My view was to at least give it like a year plus solid to keep the team together and keep something going. And settle down. I obviously did not look at it as a long-term thing because I think I you know, I'm like a really like start from scratch sort of person, and I wasn't going to be staying somewhere where the connection back to the mothership or influence on product strategy is not at that level. And also, I mean, Cisco was a hardware company, so we were a good acquisition for them because they wanted to go more and more into software, right? But it was hard to, obviously everybody was coming from the hardware background and they came from switches and routers and everything else. So, but they did a great job in keeping us separate, you know, like a Cisco badge wouldn't even work in the AbbVie office. They kept it that way, you know? And so that was great. We functioned, we still had our office in San Francisco. And they were obviously based in Milpitas and, you know, San Jose and the South Bay. So it didn't really make a difference. And they're really classy people. I have to really give it to them in terms of how they did the acquisition.
It's a highly respected company. Yes.
It's a very classy organization. You know, so yeah, I think, so it was all good, but I had pretty much in my mind decided that after I keep the team together and we get it to because I really also selfishly wanted to hit the goal of like, getting AbbVie to sell $1 billion worth of software, which we finally did before I got out of there, which is that the zero to kind of that type of journey was pretty amazing. And we started dominating the market. By the time I got out, we started doing $25 million deals, you know, which is a lot of money for software.
I know, it's so fulfilling.
It's so fulfilling.
That the product has that kind of traction in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that was the factor. And then it was great. The first year was great. And then I slowly started tuning out and I started being more advisory versus I gave up. So I was CTO, but I was also running product and engineering and everything. So I slowly gave up, you know, you know, all of the teams. And then I started just advising. And then at some point I completely kind of came out of it.
So, and then chilled out for some time?
I chilled out for some time. You know, I was just thinking about kind of next steps, and but I did spend a good chunk of time with some startups. Some here, some from India, mostly just from connections and things like that. And again, like that's definitely something that I'm passionate about. Definitely want you know, to give back to the community. So definitely spent a good chunk of time with you know, young startup founders and talking to them about like whether it's go to market, whether it's the initial hiring, and how to build tight knit teams together and all that stuff. So I spent that was very gratifying as well. That was very gratifying as well.
I'm sure. So now and somebody like you cannot stay doing lightweight stuff for long, right? It's a short break now. So I'm sure you're out of that phase. So what's happening now? What's next?
Yeah. So at a very high level, and I'm sure like as we as the journey makes progress, we'll talk more in the future. But right now, I just started something. It is in stealth mode. It is in enterprise software. And at this stage, we're really talking to customers on, finding the right product market fit and what do we want to build. So it's pretty early days, and I'm excited about it. But yeah, hopefully in the coming months we'll have more of the journey to share. And also I want to be just sort of, especially with me starting my career in Hyderabad, and how I knew about Hysia from Jan, Vijay, and Pramati. I do feel like I have my software roots in Hyderabad, and it's a community that I want to be associated, more closely. So I'm sure we'll share more of the journey in the coming months. But I think it's an exciting phase. We just got started again, so I think it should be a lot of fun.
We will look forward to the coming out, the announcements and such, and we'll definitely have another conversation for sure. And we'll take up on your offer as well to connect and help. I know time is precious, but we will do the best we can. Use as little of your
happy
time
to do it. Yeah.
Impact. We'll take a few questions. There's somebody who's asked an interesting one. Managing clients, technology team, and personal time. What does your day usually look like?
I mean, it's different now because, obviously I think when in the 10 years of AppD, it was pretty brutal. I think I basically was sleeping for 3 to 4 hours a day. And it was and I spent about 50% of my time on the field, just visiting customers, whether it was East Coast, whether it was Europe, whether it was, Asia Pac, etc. So I think I kind of overdid that. And I just almost kind of burnt myself out because the year that I took off, I think it was really tough for me because it's when your body rests, that's when you find out how badly bruised you are. And it took me some time to recover, from it. So I wouldn't recommend going all out like that. I would, recommend a more balanced approach. And I obviously in this journey, I'm hoping to get really, really solid, folks that I've cultivated a lot of relationships with in terms of joining the journey early on so that it's a more balanced, approach versus when, 2, 3, 4 people in the startup are just kind of, trying to stretch it. But yeah, I would do a more balanced approach, but it was super unbalanced through the AppD days because it was all work all the time, a lot of travel. I was on a flight half of the time, or I was back in product meetings. So it's very intense, but one of the most enjoyable times of my life, and no regrets about it. But I would definitely caution that you want to have more balance when you do this.
Very important. I think you need to recharge your energies and creative juices as well. It's true. It's very important. But there are phases probably where you give it a full go.
Absolutely.
So I'm sure we'll go through it at some point.
That's more natural.
And then just figure out the balance later.
That's more natural.
Yes. So long as you haven't burnt out in the process, near burnout is okay.
Near burnout is
once,
okay.
Yes, and then you adjust. So an interesting question from a mutual friend of ours, Pawan Borle.
Hey, Pawan.
So you talked about pivoting. You talked about pivoting, and so it'd be interesting to know what has been your key learnings and takeaways from the process of pivoting, and how do you think one can really leverage this in the organization culture, large organization, because Pawan is inside the way now and heading HR there. So large organization, they are a very nimble organization for an airline, very agile. But how do you get this culture into large organizations? Question.
No, I think, pivoting is such an essential part of just kind of I think there are 2 parts, right? Like pivoting for a startup is survival. Because whatever idea you're talking about maybe doesn't have enough takers in the market right now. And whatever you're hearing, that could be a pivot could be the change that could change, the future for you. So you just have to listen very carefully. You just have to make sure you collect data points from all the 40, 50 customers that you've talked to initially, and you validate that the pivot's going to basically be solid. And sometimes, again, you pivot multiple times, right? But I think in a startup, it's more survival. I would actually say that even in a big company, it's kind of survival because, now the young, nimble companies can beat you because it's a pure game of like who innovates quickly. And brand names don't work if you're not innovating. But when you think about pivot for a larger company, you have to think about if you don't disrupt yourself, someone else will disrupt you. And if you have that mentality, then you end up disrupting yourself and not get too comfortable with, we've built this great business, like everything is kind of working and we just have to maintain it. If you maintain the sort of like speed, if you maintain the pace, sometimes it's not enough because someone's hungrier than you. And I think as long as you use the formula of, disrupt yourself, otherwise someone else will, then I think that's the right attitude to have as a bigger company with culture and everything else.
I think listening carefully is one word you use, which is very important. I mean, it's not just about going and meeting customers, being able to pick up the right signals. And then the bigger problem for large companies, one is of course listening carefully. The bigger problem for large companies is like, how do you react to it? The decision-making process of, the analysis and then execution, both. Large companies kind of have this very, very sluggish machinery. It becomes almost impossible to react. So you're right. I mean, if they don't disrupt themselves, somebody else will. And they're out of business. So one more question: how do you hire the initial core team? We discussed it briefly, but maybe we can just touch upon it quickly. What do you look for in the initial core team? Because while at that time you're focused more on what you need at that point, but subconsciously you also want to make sure they gel well with the culture you kind of are comfortable with. How do you pick the initial core team?
I think you have to look for some commonality in kind of, you don't necessarily have to hire domain experts, right? Like I think people pick up skills, but attitude is something that you can't pick up. You either have it or you don't, and you're either hungry or you're not, and you're either passionate or you're not. And so we kind of looked for, to be honest, like I think we, it was always a learning. And now what I know now and what I knew like in 2008 in terms of hiring was very different. But generally some of the ones that worked, I think attitude is the key thing. Being able to, so if you think about it from engineering, right? If you write a bunch of code and you get attached to it and you're not willing to part with it because that code is no longer relevant because you're pivoting or you're doing something, that's just a really bad attitude. So you're like, hey, this is about doing a business. This is about building a business. This is not about my code's super valuable, so why are you treating it like that? Or, and there's no like, in the beginning, there's no dirty job. Like if you have to write some automation to get things going because you want to speed up your release pipeline, I mean, even if you're a developer, go do it. Write tests if you have to, like, anything goes in the beginning. And so people who don't fit into that type of attitude, whether it's attachment to sort of like what you write, or whether it's, I want to be able to do X amount of things to make things happen and to speed things up, they don't really fit in the first 2 years. So you just have to be careful about like what you want there.
I think the attitude, you're right, is the most important. And in small teams, it can be a huge drain on energy if somebody has an attitude issue. That's a very good point. Another question, while dealing with the financial domain, I mean, banks and such, were there any specific challenges you dealt with when working with banks and such?
Yeah, I think it's an obvious one. It's security, so you just have to ramp up your security processes. And especially if you also have a SaaS deployment, we actually did both. So you could deploy AppDynamics on-prem, you could deploy us in SaaS. So having an on-prem deployment helped us a lot with the banks because they want to keep everything in-house. So the security part was probably the biggest thing. And they're also fussier because again, like that's the nature of the beast. But we were extremely successful with the financial services. There's literally no major bank, in the US and Europe who was not a customer. Like Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. We did a $25 million deal with Wells Fargo at some point. So it was, yeah. So financial services, we were really successful. Even the banks in Europe, like BNP and all of those guys. So we were very successful with banks. And I think security was the only thing, and they're a little more fussy. But we were very successful with that segment.
No, that's fantastic. I think that's one kind of high point in any startup journey. If you can sell to banks, that means you've arrived, at least in the mainstream.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
because they're very fussy, and not that they're most technology savvy, but they're very fussy at least. And so if you can convince them, you can convince almost anybody. So one last question.
Absolutely.
We have hit the 10 o'clock,
Yeah, sure.
but I think this question we should take. This is a startup entrepreneur himself. As an employee in a startup, how to evaluate how your company is doing? What are the metrics to look for?
I mean, I think it depends on the stage. Obviously, I think when you're building product, I feel like you have to look at customer activity, interaction, and are you getting enough customers to talk to you, and are you absorbing enough feedback? Are you having enough meetings where you're having meaningful conversations about the product market fit, right? So that's one part of it. But as you then start selling the product and as you start installing the product, then you can start looking at how many installations are successful. What's the conversion rate of when you're having a successful, proof of concept, etc. Because the conversion rate and the win rate of the product is actually really important. So it's probably things like those in the beginning that you have to be careful about, and that's what makes you think about whether you're doing well, or not.
Thank you so much, Bhaskar. That's fantastic.
Chris.
I think it's a great way to start our morning here. It was just, I mean, though I know a lot of what you talked about, not all of it, but good amount of it, it is still so exciting just to listen to the whole journey. And and so we will definitely have more conversations in the coming months, we will do it. And we look forward to your announcing the next product when you come out of stealth mode. Wish you the very, very best in that journey. I'm sure it will do extremely well. I know the other people along with you in this journey. And I think this combination is, for me personally, a bunch of extremely close friends doing it. And each one of them is capable of building a phenomenal startup. And when 3-4 of them come together, it has to be nothing but phenomenal. I'm sure it'll be fantastic. All the best, all the best in that journey. And we'll
I think the only quick advice that I'll give is that, I think for everybody who wants to be kind of an entrepreneur and who wants to sort of do something in a startup, don't be limited by thinking about like what you're supposed to do based on where you worked on before, what college you come from. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, I come from a super regular kind of a college. I didn't have that type of background to do whatever, but think more about what you want to do versus what you're supposed to do. And I think that's always the guiding light, and be passionate about something and just follow that. That's probably what I wanted to end with.
I think that is the most important thing. I mean, like, of course, wanting to do a startup is a starting point, but be passionate about it, what you're doing. That's the most important. That passion can drive. It's going to be very hard first few months, first 1 or 2 years. I think that passion is the most important thing that will just keep them going. No, that's a fantastic advice.
Sure.
So, so Bhaskar, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. I enjoyed it, and and we will definitely do more of this.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great.
And
thank you so much.
Nirja, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ramesh, and thank you, Bhaskar. There's some questions in the Q&A section. Probably I'll share it with you. So they'll be happy if you can answer them. There are very few, I think 5 of them that went unanswered. So probably they will look for your inputs. I'll share with you over email, if possible. Just
no problem.
Yeah.
No problem.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bhaskar. It was real learning for me. I know,
Thank
and we had a real nice crowd also. So I'm sure that all of them benefited from your...
Perfect. Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much.
And all the best for your future company.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Ramesh.
Thank you so much.
You got the best out of Bhaskar. I mean, your questions were very good.
I mean, it's a good friend, so it comes out more naturally. So
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Yeah.
Thank you
so much. Bye. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
is 80. The morning ke liye it is a very